Hello. The US Supreme Court has allowed President Trump's travel ban against people from 6 mainly Muslim countries to take full effect, even though legal challenges continue in lower courts. Opponents say the restrictions are unconstitutional and discriminatory, targeting Muslims. But as Peter Bowes reports, it's a significant victory for Donald Trump.
Donald Trump has got his way, at least for the time being. After being blocked by lower courts and revised 3 times, the president's ban will go into effect despite continuing legal challenges. It was a major plank of his election campaign to protect the United States from terrorism. The countries on the list, including 6 mainly Muslim nations, are deemed to pose a threat. Travel to the US will be restricted for people from Iran, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia and Chad. There are also restrictions on North Korea and Venezuela. Opponents say the restrictions are unconstitutional and discriminatory because they target mostly Muslims. The Supreme Court has not ruled on the legality of the ban, just that it can go into effect while arguments continue in the lower courts. Hearings are scheduled in 2 states, Washington and Virginia, later this week. That goes to the heart of the US Constitution and whether it's been breached. The Supreme Court is still likely to have the final say. Peter Bowes, BBC.
Well, earlier, President Trump faced criticism for his decision to reduce the size of 2 vast preservation areas which contain some of America's most stunning scenery. The parks in Utah were designated as national monuments by Presidents Clinton and Obama. Some critics say the move could pave the way for mining and drilling. Mr. Trump was speaking in Salt Lake City, from where our correspondent James Cook sent this report.
Nothing on earth prepares you for the Valley of the Gods. It looks like another planet, but this is the heart of the Bears Ears Nature Preserve in Utah, although it seems not for much longer.
Hey, cows!
For Bruce Adams, victory is at hand.
Come on!
The rancher has been fighting to return federal lands to state control for years, and now he's found his champion.
I am just so grateful to President Trump because he's not your ordinary politician. He believes in rural people. He believes in local decision-making.
Hundreds of miles north, this was the welcome for Mr. Trump in Salt Lake City, where he confirmed he was slashing the Bears Ears preservation area by 85% and cutting another protected area in half.
Some people think that the natural resources of Utah should be controlled by a small handful of very distant bureaucrats located in Washington. And guess what? They're wrong.
In one of the poorest counties in the country, these residents back the decision. Some see an opportunity to mine for minerals or drill oil. Whether or not there are valuable resources under this landscape is controversial and contested, but above the ground there are many treasures. These are hollows where the native people of this land ground their corn perhaps 1,000 years ago, and this is where they stored that corn. But unfortunately, there's also evidence here of looting. The battle to save sacred sites like this ancient dwelling is being waged by Native Americans, who are now a minority in this mainly Mormon state.
This is a struggle since the day the white people came here. The Mormons came into this area in 1879. Since the day they came, it's been destruction, destruction, looting, looting, looting.
Some of the rock art here may date back 10,000 years or more, but it was just 12 months ago when President Obama declared this a protected area. President Trump's fans say his plan to reverse that gives power to the people. His opponents call it cultural vandalism. James Cook, BBC News, Bears Ears in Utah.
And for more on this, I spoke a short time ago to Jessica Wall, Government Affairs Manager for Outdoor Industry Association. I began by asking her whether President Trump was right to say the land belonged to the people.
He has a point, but local people have weighed in, and we have over 3 million comments from Americans saying that they don't want any changes to these protections. 400 business executives and CEOs, both from Utah and around the country. So what we've seen is that people want these monuments to remain protected, open, and accessible to all Americans. And what the president did today is in direct conflict with that.
So what do you worry will actually happen now?
We worry about the impact to the outdoor recreation economy, which is $887 billion in America. It employs 7.6 million Americans. And in these monuments, especially Grand Staircase, there's a tried and true record of the impact to local communities and local economies. There's been 13% increase in population, 24% in job growth. The per capita personal income has grown 32%. So we have data that this is good for the local communities and economies, and we worry about its impact. People, those places, and the outdoor recreation that can happen there.
But those agreeing with Donald Trump here saying, well, actually, this will open up the opportunity for other economic benefits, things like ranching or other business in the area.
These places have been protected for 21 years, so there's certainty. There's business certainty for the outdoor recreation economy, the people that have built their livelihoods there. 21 years is a long time to then reverse and lose those protections. Those guides and outfitters that have trips planned for 3 or 4 years. And what it's doing, really breaking this monument apart, these monuments, taking away 2 million acres of protected public lands, is uncertainty. Uncertainty for those communities and economies, and uncertainty for the sustainable jobs that they're supporting.
Okay, and just briefly, finally, what happens next? Legal challenge?
Some are going to be part of legal challenges. OIA, our organization, is not going to be part of that, but we've already had, in the past 5 hours, 1,000 of our members reach out to Congress, touch 250 Congress members. So we think that the next thing is Congress needs to step up and say this isn't okay and make different decisions on the monuments.
Well, that was Jessica Wall speaking to me earlier. There was no deal agreed in Brussels on Monday to move on to the next phase of the Brexit talks, despite all the expectation that agreement was on the cards. The British Prime Minister is believed to have off from the talks with the President of the European Commission after an intervention by the Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland, Mrs May's parliamentary partners. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, reports from Brussels.
Was she here to reveal the deal, or was it slipping away? Arriving for lunch, the Prime Minister didn't exactly look delighted, but after weeks of trying to grip a deal, it seemed it was on. She'd only parked up for a brief encounter, but lunch became longer, time later and later, and by tea time, look at their faces, it was off for today.
It's clear, crucially, that we want to move forward together, but on a couple of issues, some differences do remain, which require further negotiation and consultation, and those will continue, but we will reconvene before the end of the week, and I am also confident that we will conclude this positively.
Didn't feel very positive this afternoon.
Despite our best efforts and the significant progress we and our teams have made over the past days on the 3 main withdrawal issues, it was not possible to reach a complete agreement today.
Despite all the hope, all the anticipation, the negotiating teams leave Brussels today without a deal.
So different to this morning. Listen to this. Eager MEPs saying, "We're the team." It seemed all go, sure-ish that the UK government had given enough to make it work, even though what's described as a contradiction over the Irish border.
As long as we have the commitment that there will be full alignment, it's okay, there will be no border.
So as far as you're concerned, sir, the text includes a concession from the British government over the Northern Irish border.
Yeah, but is that a surprise to you? I mean, the British government created for itself a contradiction.
Nothing today? No prospect today?
I'm optimistic that it is possible, 50-50.
But while the Prime Minister was in her crucial meeting, watch this. As a suggestion of a deal had become the accepted truth, the DUP, whose support Theresa May needs, waltzed down the stairs at Stormont.
We have been very clear. Northern Ireland must leave the European Union on the same terms as the rest of the United Kingdom, and we will not accept any form of regulatory divergence which separates Northern Ireland.
As time ticked on, 20 minutes later, the Prime Minister broke off her meetings in Brussels to phone Mrs Foster. I understand the DUP made it plain she could not support the proposed deal. The precise opposite to the Irish leader who has pushed and pushed, who talked of his shock.
I am surprised and disappointed that the British government now appears not to be in a position to conclude what was agreed earlier today. I accept that the Prime Minister has asked for more time, and I know that she faces many challenges, and I acknowledge that she is negotiating in good faith.
UK government sources are eager to play down the idea that a deal today was ever a dead cert. The document had been put together and accepted by officials on both sides. Senior politicians here in Brussels and in Dublin had gone on the record to suggest it was pretty much done. It was only when it became clear that the Prime Minister's allies found it unpalatable that suddenly the deal was off. There is no question that it's suddenly all over, but tonight there's no clear way back. Those close to her claim it's not just the Tories' reliance on the DUP that sunk the deal for today. Yet she leaves having taken so many steps, but not moved very much further forward. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Brussels.
Stay with us on BBC News. Still to come, around 8 million of plastic are dumped in the world's ocean each year. The United Nations is discussing a plan to stop it. This is BBC News, the latest headlines. The US Supreme Court has ruled that President Trump's travel ban restricting visitors from 6 mainly Muslim countries can be fully implemented. Donald Trump says he will dramatically cut the size of 2 protected wilderness areas in the state of Utah. Native American leaders are outraged. The former president of war-torn Yemen has been killed by Houthi rebels days after he turned against them in the country's civil war. Ali Abdullah Saleh died after his convoy was attacked just south of the capital Sana'a. On Saturday, he had ended his alliance with the Houthis and reached out to the Saudi-led coalition. The 75-year-old ruled Yemen for more than 3 decades. Our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen reports.
Ali Abdullah Saleh's house has been destroyed by his former allies, the Houthis. They might break the power of Saleh's extended and the tribal network that helped him hold power in Yemen for more than 30 years. A Houthi tank crew near the house celebrated. A fighter, Abu Ahmad, said, "Thank God for the great victory and the end of the most corrupt leader in the Islamic world." Houthi fighters killed Saleh as he tried to flee Sana'a, the capital, for his hometown. Mobile phone video of his corpse had echoes of the downfall of another long-serving Arab leader, Libya's Colonel Gaddafi, 6 years ago. Since Saleh's death, people have been running for cover as Saudi-led airstrikes hit Houthi targets. Sana'a's hospitals took in more patients. The war was already a man-made catastrophe. The UN fears that new uncertainty after Saleh could make it worse.
Key commodities such as fuel and food are in short supply, and we need those to maintain our support to 7 million people who are in really bad state. And with famine round the corner and the cholera re-emergence and the threat of that again makes for a very, very tragic future, I think.
For almost a week, Sana'a has been rocked by yet another front in Yemen's war, as Saleh's men and the Houthis fought for the city. The fighting followed months of tension between them and rumours that Saleh was about to sell out his former allies, the Houthis. Then on Saturday he announced it was time for a new page with the Saudi-led coalition that since 2015 has been bombing Yemen to try to destroy the Houthis. Ali Abdullah Saleh had been a force in Yemen, usually a dominant one, since the 90s. He was a president for 34 years. World leaders courted him as a necessary man in a highly strategic place. Saleh called governing Yemen dancing on the heads of snakes. He was very good at doing deals with Yemen's tribes, but it looks as if he tried to make one deal too many, switching sides in the war, and to stop it happening, the Houthis were prepared to kill him. The Houthis are a powerful Yemeni faction. They swept into Sana'a in 2014 in alliance with Ali Abdullah Saleh and his men. But it's about more than who controls these streets for Saudi Arabia and its allies. They say the Houthis take orders from Iran, so the conflict became part of a bigger confrontation across the Middle East between the Saudis and the Iranians. Yemen was the poorest Arab country before the war pushed it to a new level of misery. Saleh's killing could create more chaos, making the lives of Yemenis who've become pawns in the quarrels of much bigger powers even more hellish. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news. President Trump has publicly endorsed the Republican candidate Roy Moore in the hotly contested Alabama Senate race. Mr. Moore is a former Alabama Chief Justice who is facing claims he molested or harassed women and young girls as young as 14 while he was in his 30s. Political Affairs Chief is to visit North Korea on Tuesday. This is the highest level trip there by a UN official for 6 years. It comes at a time of extremely high tensions in the Korean peninsula, and less than a week after Pyongyang test-fired a ballistic missile believed to be capable of reaching the United States. The former Catalan president Carles Puigdemont has appeared in court in Belgium, where he is fighting an extradition request by Spain. He and 4 other former ministers are accused of rebellion over the declaration of Catalonia's independence from Spain. They argue they won't get a fair trial if they're sent back to Spain. Police in Malta have arrested 10 people in connection with the murder of a high-profile investigative journalist. Daphne Galizia died in a car bomb explosion in October. She was known for her popular blog accusing top politicians of corruption. Prime Minister Joseph Muscat said all those arrested were Maltese nationals and were known to police. A plan for zero tolerance of plastic waste ending up in the oceans is being discussed at the Nations Summit on Pollution. It's estimated that as much as 8 million tonnes of plastic enters the seas every year. And to try to limit that flow, governments are being asked to consider a new treaty. This comes as scientists say they're shocked to discover plastic killing marine life even in the remotest corners of the planet. Our environment analyst Harabin reports now from Kenya.
The plastic epidemic is everywhere. Here volunteers are clearing up a beach at Watamu in eastern Kenya. The plastic comes from as far as Indonesia and Japan, and it's harming animals like turtles which ingest plastic pieces. Half of the turtles brought in for treatment for eating plastics end up dead. Here's one lucky, being measured before it's put back in the sea. It was brought in sick by a fisherman. The man who runs the turtle hospital says turtles offer an insight into pollution of the entire ocean.
So we focus on turtles because they are endangered, but also they're quite a charismatic species. People like turtles. It's easier to get people to like turtles than maybe a ray or some kind of weird fish. But also because they're an excellent indicator species of ecosystem health.
At the United Nations in Kenya, these installations offer an artist's insight into the impact of plastics in the oceans. UN environment ministers are discussing what to do about it. Some nations are banning plastic bags completely, others are more cautious. The UN's oceans chief wants much faster action.
The plastic, the tremendous amount of plastic that we use in our economies ends up in the ocean, and the ocean has been seen as a trash dump, where we dump everything we don't need. And that plastic never goes away, mostly. It floats on the surface, is fall down to the bottom, and we urgently need to do something about it.
Scientists recently discovered that creatures at the very bottom of the sea in the Mariana Trench had ingested microplastic fragments. Many of them will have been carried of miles from cities far inland. In Nairobi, for instance, they've banned plastic bags. But look at this.
The UN grinds slowly, while governments are figuring out how to progress
ordinary people have simply got to stop doing this. Roger Harrabin, BBC News, Nairobi.
Child marriage, illiteracy and a lack of clean drinking water. Those issues come up as we report from the developing world. But there are problems in the US too. In the last of his America First series, Aleem Maqbool looks at post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not confined to the battlefield. Children in the inner cities are coping with it too. Aleem travelled to Atlanta to find out more.
Lieutenant Siobhan Edwards patrolled some of the toughest streets in all of America.
Run as fast as you can.
Drug use, gang violence and shootings are commonplace. She worries that for young people growing up here, it can sometimes feel like a conflict zone.
War to them may be a local drive-by between gang rivals, you know. War to them may be walking down the street on a needle or seeing someone, you know, using that as war. And these kids see this on a daily basis, so they may think it's normal when, you know, we know it's not.
And for those who spend their whole lives in an environment like this, we now know that all the exposure to the violence and danger has a very tangible impact on their mental health.
Well, one of the most extensive studies on post-traumatic stress disorder in the community was done here in Atlanta, and it found the staggering statistic that of those who lived in low-income areas in this city, 46% suffered from PTSD. That is a rate much higher even than soldiers who've seen war.
The research team's now focusing on how the brains of children in a violent neighborhood are affected by the trauma.
Unlike soldiers who come home from war and now they no longer are in that dangerous environment, a lot of the children in this study are still living in that dangerous environment. Gunshots and this violence in the street is something that they're adapting to, and their brain is adapting to it as well, and we can see that on the imaging.
In effect, in these neighborhoods, children's brains are measurably growing up faster because they're exposed to. But that affects their ability to learn. It makes it difficult for them to build relationships, makes them more susceptible to depression and to drug use. 12-year-old Angel Duval, chosen at random to be part of the study, is typical in her experience. She's seen fights and told us of a shootout right beside her home.
We were in bed, and then they started shooting, and then my mom came in and told us to get on the floor and get up until it stops. And then it stopped, and one person died, and the police came.
Angel talks about it like it's normal, but that kind of incident is having an impact on the whole family.
It's hard for me to go to sleep because sometimes the gun violence, like the guns going off, I can still hear them sometimes like ringing in my ear. Like the noise, like sometimes it just brings back me.
Researchers say the levels of PTSD in US inner cities are comparable to those in refugee populations around the world, but that here it goes unrecognized, leaving many to cope alone with the impact. Aleem Maqbool in Atlanta.
Cricket now, and on the fourth day of the second Ashes Test, England's fight back continues. Jimmy Anderson picked up 2 wickets in the first hour a short time ago in Adelaide. Australia were on 89 for 6. They lead England by 304. A reminder of our top story now. The US Supreme Court. President Trump's travel ban restricting visitors from 6 mainly Muslim countries can be fully implemented. And you can get in touch with me and most of the team here on Twitter. I'm at L Vaughan Jones. Thanks for your company. You're watching BBC News.